Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping in again. This week at the kitchen table, I have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Rachel Borwn. Professor Borwn is an associate professor of medieval European history at the University of Chicago, and she's perhaps better known online as Fencing Bear at Prayer and for her blog of the same name. And in her blog, you'll find writings on her research as a scholar of medieval Christianity, on existing as a conservative in academia in our current year, on Milo Yiannopoulos and his role in public discourse, and of course on fencing. Rachel also appears regularly on the Three Creators Symposium podcast, and somehow she still finds time to play the fiddle. We talked about almost all of these things today, except the fiddle, so hopefully I can have her back for another chat one of these days. So grab a drink, everyone, and pull up a chair. So thank you so much, Professor Borwn, for being here at the kitchen table with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. And so maybe just to start off, we can do some brief introductions. If you could just give us a little bit of information about yourself and your academic background and how you found yourself kind of at large in the internet world.
So I'm a historian of medieval Christianity, and I've been teaching at the University of Chicago since 1994. It's actually my first job out of graduate school, and I've basically been here since then. So I kind of grew up here as a teacher and obviously as a writer and researcher. I started blogging as Fencing Bear at Prayer in 2008. I don't know whether that makes me a big, sort of a latecomer or an early adopter in blogging. I was interested in finding a way to write about some of the things that I'd been learning as a fencer, which is why it's Fencing Bear, and also to give myself a place to start writing about a new project I was beginning at that point on prayer and the practice and experience of prayer. And these two things came together in the blog as Fencing Bear at Prayer because one of the reasons that I'd started fencing, I actually started fencing about 5 years before, fencing now for 15 years, was that I wanted some way of understanding the military metaphors that appear in medieval monastic writing, that many of the spiritual treatises that I was reading have this very strong military imagery. And I understand now that much of it comes from the Psalms, which is, of course, the primary text that monks and nuns were using for their daily offices, for their daily prayer practices. But there are also ways in which training one's soul is described as a sort of military spiritual practice. Most Christians are usually familiar with the passage from Ephesians about putting on the armor of God. I have in the blog a tag that's taken from Augustine of Hippo's commentary on the Psalms, I believe Psalm 33, Psalm 34, on your soul as a sword to be wielded by God. And so the blog had that sort of twinned character from the very beginning, that it was about my trying to become a better fencer and the kind of mental discipline that it took as a sport fencer to stop losing and understand what that took, but also as a place to sort of play with my academic work and things that I was learning about prayer. And inevitably, because I'd set it up that way, the two fused, so that as it happened, I worked very, very hard on my research. The first year I was writing the blog, I was on leave that year, and I got to get really deeply into the work. But I worked so hard I gave myself writer's block, which was not a happy place to be. I mean, I understand it in retrospect as a kind of, it was a spiritual crisis, but also a crisis of overwork. And so the blog also transformed into a meditation on, how do you get through a experience like that with the writer's block, and what did it mean? And after sort of 4 years of blogging about this through the Fencing Bear at Prayer, I realized that I'd in effect worked myself through the 7 deadly sins, beginning with envy, because that's the one clearly that I have the most difficulty with, and still there at the, having worked through it all with envy. And therefore, in fact, it answered my own prayer, which was to understand the kind of discipline that the monastic writers were talking about, because, of course, the seven deadly sins is a monastic reflection on the temptations and the difficulties that we have in, how will you say it, developing a proper relationship with God.
Right. And I found often reading your blog, although I didn't start following it until maybe a little over a year ago, that
you've been reading that long. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah.
Wonderful.
I've been, I subscribed to it, I think, the first time I came across it, which would have been probably through following Milo.
Okay, good.
But, absolutely, yeah. As soon as a fellow medievalist writing about Milo, I was subscribed instantly. So,
oh, you've made my day.
But I'm not surprised to hear that, because I've often found reading your blog that it definitely has an element of kind of an emotional side, right? Like a very kind of personal development, following your emotional navigation through things, and then pairing that with like exploring your research, which makes it even more interesting, because you get that kind of educational value out of it as well.
Yes, so that's what I was hoping to achieve.
Yeah.
But I also realize when I say I sort of gave myself the prayer, particularly with the Augustine passage, which I have little cards that if you meet me in person, I give you a prayer card, and it has that on the back. It has Fencing Bear on the front, and on the back it has the passage from Augustine that I had in effect asked to as it were surrender myself to God to use as He wills, and so, to a certain extent, some of the journey that the blog has taken me on obviously it wasn't intentional at the beginning. I didn't know exactly where I was going to end up, but that sense of exploration and teaching is very much a part of what I wanted to practice for myself in the writing.
Right. So then how did the blog move into the realm of commentary that it's kind of veered off into, I guess?
Right. Well, so I said it really has been this two-part project that for the first 4 years, it was very much about myself and my own spiritual struggle. So I'd say that's my Augustine confession moment. So right. You sort of work through who I am, how do I find God, what am I looking for, and then there was a sort of pause. In the sense that I figured out the problem of the book that I was working on, and so I was working much more intensively on the book and not so much writing in the blog anymore. But also, I think because I had in fact worked through some of the things that I'd first prayed for, and then I was sort of waiting. And in June 2015, I was walking to campus, and I was at that time looking forward to spending the summer getting back to the book and getting the footnotes in, and sort of I knew that I was going to be back really working intensively on the book. But as I was walking in, I said, I need to do this post, and it was just a little thought. And I was also about to go on the National Review cruise that summer, and so I was also thinking about exactly what kind of engagement am I going to bring now to the things that I'd in fact been reading about for several years, starting in 2012 with the election year. That year I started reading a lot more in current events and political commentary, and got curious about history that I hadn't properly studied previously, about the history of the United States, about the history of the modern political movements and so forth, and starting to tie that into my thinking of, well, what do I know as a medievalist, and how does what I know as a medievalist fit in with the kinds of concerns that we have in the present? And of course, since one of the things I work on is devotion to the Virgin Mary, it's my principal topic, and I've also taught, in parallel with the Fencing Bear at Prayer, I was also teaching courses on knights and samurai and on warfare, and thinking about chivalry in sort of the lived context of the Middle Ages, but also in the imagined context of what does it mean to modernity? The Knights and Samurai course was very much about that problem as well. Anyway, so there's this. I'm walking in, and I say, there's good things that have come out of Western civilization that we really are losing sight of, particularly in the debates about, what to do with the dead white European males. And that's how the title came about of the blog post. It's now infamous. 3 cheers for white men, by which I meant the dead white European males who, the Academy has been taught to vilify in the last 20, 30 years. And my 3 cheers were chivalry, in the sense that we recognize that it's a very bad thing to rape women, and that's a tradition that I see going back as a value well into the Middle Ages. That marriage is defined by consent, which is defined in sacramental terms in the 12th century, drawing on Roman law, that the bond is made by consent, but made a sacrament in Christian theology in the 12th century. And then the women's right to vote, which obviously is almost 100 years old, right, in this country. Yeah. And with a little coda of, and if you disagree with me, remember that, the idea of freedom of speech was also developed by these horrible white men. Right. So I wrote that up with some nervousness, right? I was like, I'm going to put that out, and let's see what happens. And of course, nothing happened, except for a few weeks later, Donald Trump announced that he was going to be running for president, and the world changed. Right? Yeah. January 2016, a colleague in medieval studies discovered this post because she was herself Googling around, I think, in the internets, for instances of what she called white medievalism, and because of the title of the post, found me. Right. And now we have been in an ongoing disagreement. Right. Over what I meant by that post. She read it as my asserting white supremacy and my white feminism. I engaged in a Facebook conversation with her and some others in January 2016, and then did a number of posts that are linked now with that 3 Cheers for White Men post about what I'd meant by chivalry, about what I thought I was up to. Thanked her for giving me the opportunity to talk with people about it. Obviously, the attention that it got in the Facebook thread gave me more readers. And sort of was launched into the culture wars in that way because some College Fix ran an article about the discussion, and Andrew Holt, my friend, found me and did an interview with me about what I thought about the teaching of Western civilization and so forth. Right. And coincidentally, this was, in fact, the very same winter that Milo had started his tour, whom I had never heard of.
Okay. Well, and I found... I guess the timing explains a lot of the what followed after your blog post with Trump, and how kind of occupied everyone became with this, these issues. But on the other hand, I found that blog post, the 3 Cheers for White Men, to be not be confrontational at all. Like, I found the tone was not accusatory or wasn't aggressive. So I wonder if, maybe part of it is the kind of hyper-cultural sensitivity that seems to be the going thing these days. Or, I guess I'm surprised by what could seem like a fairly, self-evident and fairly collegially made point could be taken at its least charitable interpretation, right? And used.
Well, yes, it did surprise me a little bit. And what I was more astonished by in the long run was medieval studies is a fairly small community of people, mm-hmm. and I am obviously rather better known in it than I was originally, but I was moderately well known at the time, and even if there were people that misunderstood the post or heard about it first through people who had given it a reading that I didn't intend, I was very surprised in the long run that more people didn't say, "Oh, wait a minute, she doesn't really mean what you're saying she means. Let's talk about this."
Exactly.
And that was the spirit that I wrote the original Chivalry series in. I just thought, oh great, I've got, we can talk about this now. I tried to stay very cheerful. I've parted ways with some of National Review's positions in the last few years because I did vote for Donald Trump, because by the end of the election cycle I was persuaded that was the better choice. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I like, that National Review tags itself with is the idea of the happy warrior, right? And since I'm Fencing Bear, which is sort of ridiculous, right? I'm a teddy bear. Really, I'm a teddy bear. I'm a little toy. I've had friends over the years saying, "Really, can you stop carrying that around at the tournaments? It's a toy." And I'm like, no, I'm the teddy bear. With the original series of posts, I tried to stay in that mode, right? I said, look, what someone disagreeing with you gives you is the opportunity for the conversation. And there's a post in that series, it's linked in the Three Cheers for White Men post too, called How to Be a Happy Warrior, where I set up what I thought I was up to, saying, how to be a conservative in academia. Well, it's challenging. First, you need to learn everything, right? Because people will challenge you on your opinions, and you need to have read deeply and for a fairly long time. So I didn't actually start writing about a lot of this for many years. I had 4 years of like graduate level reading, in the sense of I read harder for those 4 years in modern politics than I think I read for my own orals. So, train yourself in the material, think about it, learn to use your Facebook for practice. Those are your friends. Practice staying cheerful when they challenge you or give you information you didn't have. Respect your opponent. Thank them for the opportunity to discuss. So I really tried to stay there. What has been, disappointing, curious, is the way in which that has not been the tone in many of the Facebook groups that I am now aware of, or out there in this very community of medieval studies. They are this evening carrying on a conversation in one group, the International Congress for Medieval Studies group, that is unfortunately taking a tone that is a little bit like what has been said about me, and I don't understand it. I truly don't understand where this anger is coming from. And some of the anger directed at me now is saying, well, you just don't get it, and they're angry because I'm clearly not sensitive enough to the kinds of issues that they're concerned about. Well,
right. They're mad because you don't get it now.
They're mad because I don't get it, and I do think I get it, but it's very hard to communicate that without, using the tact that I think Milo has often tried to do, which is say, well, but I have friends. And of course, that's not sufficient to prove that you're not a racist in this particular critical conversation. So I'm not quite sure how we answer it.
But I think your other two pieces of advice or tactics are something everyone should follow, that mastery of your subject matter, and then just, practice the happy warrior. Be thankful for the opportunity for the conversation and try to proceed with that, most charitable interpretation, I guess. I think that's, if everyone were to follow that advice, we might find these things more productive. But I want to try and just to give people an idea of kind of how your path has unfolded. So you had the Three Cheers for White Men post, which eventually, I guess, led to this kind of attention within your professional sphere. But was it that post that put you in contact with Milo, or was it something further down the line?
Well, certainly I told him about it when I wrote to him.
Okay.
That because of the attention that Three Cheers for White Men got, that same winter, Alan Franson, who's another colleague in Anglo-Saxon studies, had gotten some attention.
And maybe, sorry, I'll just pause briefly to just give a little bit of backstory on the Alan Franson situation. He was a professor at Loyola.
Yes,
I believe.
He's in Chicago as well.
Yeah, and it was discovered that he had a personal blog where he dared to suggest that feminism was not compulsory for everybody. and
He
and
used
I
even
mean,
spicier language than I did.
yeah.
Uh,
But basically, I mean, and I pored over his blog page when that controversy kind of became public. And I mean, for as spicy as he may have been for some people's taste, there was absolutely nothing that was outright misogynist or discriminatory or, any of the kind of slurs that were hurled his way afterwards. But because he took this stance of not even anti-feminism, but just saying that men might find, I guess, more meaning or more satisfaction pursuing traditionally masculine pastimes, he was, I think you could say blackballed without
yes.
exaggerating.
No, the same group that has been concerned with me, I believe, managed to get a honorary session at Medieval Congress at Kalamazoo canceled. There was a fest trip that had been planned in his honor that was canceled.
Yeah, which just I was so disgraceful to me. Like a lifetime of work, previously respected and valued work could just be thrown aside because of an unpopular opinion. It was shocking to me.
Yes. So at that time, then I wrote to Alan, and I said, "Brother." And what was interesting is I think we'd known each other previously because we were both in the city, and I think his book. I've used his book Bloody Good on chivalry in some of my own teaching. So I wrote to him. I said, gee, Alan, I'm really sorry you're going through this. And one of the things that sort of gave him, I think, the courage to write the kinds of things that he was in his own blogging was he like me, started a martial art in adulthood. That he's a boxer.
Yeah.
And so, we ended up talking about our own practice, and he was telling me about his boxing practice and such. But the other thing about Alan that is, of course, interesting in this context is he's also gay. Mm-hmm. And there was a little moment in the conversation we had. There was like, Milo was just then, his Rutgers talk that had gotten disrupted was in February, I think, of that year. And I was writing the blog posts about chivalry exactly around that time. And I was mainly reading National Review, so not really Breitbart, but Breitbart was carrying, obviously, articles about what was going on. And so I was sort of mildly aware. And Alan and I were sort of going, who is this guy? And have we heard of him? And what do we think about him? Right? So when Milo was here in Chicago in May that spring and his talk at DePaul was disrupted, again, I sort of noticed it, right?
Yeah.
But again, I wasn't watching his talks yet. And then in September, Jay Ellison, our Dean of Students, sent out his famous No Safe Space letter. And because I was, you know about that, right?
Yeah.
So that at the University of Chicago, to our incoming class, that do not expect to find safe spaces or trigger warnings here. We are, here to engage in this rigorous intellectual activity. And so my curiosity was piqued, right? And I was aware of Milo's talks, but I had never watched any of them. So I said, I need to know. I'm a medievalist. I don't think you should be condemned as a heretic without a proper inquisition. Let's go find out. And so I started watching his videos that were up on YouTube. This was before his new tour had really kicked off. And, 2-3 days of binge watching Milo, and I wrote to him. And I said, Dear Mr. Yiannopoulos, I teach at the University of Chicago. And I told him about what I'd been writing. You might be aware of the Safe Space letter, and I told him about my three Cheers for White Men posts, and I admire greatly what you've been doing, because I saw that he was engaged in a similar sort of fight as Alan and I had been, in terms of pushing back against the ways in which even women aren't allowed to say, wait, the way you're talking about men is not helping anybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what his Feminism is Cancer line is about. It's feminism hurts women the most because it makes it impossible for anybody to have good relations. Women with women, women with men go off by themselves, have relationships with each other. It's like it's difficult and dangerous. And we became friends very quickly. And so as he was on his tour, his Dangerous Faggot tour that autumn with the bus and driving around to college campuses and stuff, I was watching on the live stream and sort of therefore watching him in real time go through the second leg of the tour. And I started writing about him on the blog because of what the Safe Spaces letter had said. And then I got more bold. I think the first sort of true post I did about him was after the interview with Kathy Newman, which was a holy satire Breitbart, obviously playing off the holy Batman, the Batman phrases. And then the first true post I did about him was the Kung Fu Milo post, which infamously compared him with Jesus. And I did a post in that same autumn, winter, that Breitbart ran it's an independent article, but it was linked to my blog. So, I've been quote published in Breitbart that once. But most of what I was writing about him was on the blog in real time, watching him and watching the responses to his talks, so that when the riot at Berkeley hit, I actually did a post that morning, which was meant to be a sort of finale. That one's the Why I Love Milo post. And because he was, as you found, he was sharing the posts, some of the posts, not all of them, on his Facebook. I was also writing for his fans and trying to show themselves to themselves and show the world, I hoped, what we were seeing in the talks and why we were responding to him so enthusiastically. So Why I Love Milo was, in fact, the fans on the Facebook feed, he shared that one that morning, were saying, "Oh, that's exactly right. That's what we see." And so I was trying to reflect our experience watching the tour in the post as well.
Right. So as someone who has paid such close attention to Milo and gotten to know him on a more personal level than most, I was wondering, or I guess I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about how you interpret Milo and his role in what's kind of generally called the culture wars, because you've written some really interesting interpretations of how his role as the jester or the kind of provocateur in these situations has historical mirrors.
Well, I say I was there first before Jordan Peterson. Milo is uncanny in his ability to put his finger on the things that people are most unwilling to talk about. And that is, I mean, certainly, and when I was originally comparing him to Jesus, that was sort of interesting. The Kung Fu Milo post was the first one that I sort of gave him this role in, but I'd actually been intrigued by the Kung Fu Panda's character as a kind of Jesus figure too, and particularly in the third Kung Fu Panda movie when Po becomes the dragon warrior and defeats the muskox warrior by basically turning the attack back on the muskox with love, right? And that was what I kept seeing Milo doing over and over and over again in his talks. People would throw these insults at him. The audiences would, there'd be hecklers in the audience and they say something to him, and he could tease them and make some cutting remark, but he did it with love and good cheer, and not, people say he's mean, but I never saw that, right? What I see is someone who's indeed willing to take all of the abuse that people are throwing at him and try to make it, like I did in the Happy Warrior response to my colleagues back in January 2016, try to respond with joy and love, right? And that's what I kept seeing him do, and that's what I said the Kung Fu Panda did. But as I was writing that post, and this is what's interesting about writing the post, I'm so practiced because of my research writing into the symbolism that comes to you from a text, right? That is in fact what my new book on Mary and the Art of Prayer is about. It's about the images that were used to describe the Virgin Mary and God in the medieval liturgy. And, I just finished writing that book. I'd spent, decades deeply sort of immersed in this kind of scriptural exegesis, which takes an image like the bridegroom and finds God in it, or takes the image of Mary as the ark and finds the way in which she makes God present through her giving birth to him as the ark. I'm so practiced in that kind of metaphorical figural thinking. It just comes to me.
Right, yeah.
And so when I'm writing about Milo, and okay, he's a Kung Fu Panda, but then I started realizing, he's in a bus riding around the country with this group of young men who've kind of dropped everything to hang out with him. And my goodness, he says stuff that gets everybody mad, who are like the scribes who write about things, like the journalists and the Pharisees, like the ones who are trying to live well and purely, like, I don't know, National Review, the conservatives, or he somehow lands right there in the middle of this tension. And oh my goodness, wait a minute, what's this story going to look like in the long run? And it's been spooky the way it keeps playing out that way, because who knew Berkeley was going to happen? Who knew by the end of February, after he'd been on television with Bill Maher and suddenly was on the top of the world and being invited to, CPAC and stuff, by the end of the week he'd lost everything. This is uncanny, right? But originally it was just sort of this feeling of, what am I seeing? What patterns are here? What kind of story are we in? And that somehow Milo, similar to our Lord Jesus Christ, holds a mirror up to the worst things in our culture and shows us who we are, right? And I think ultimately in the crucifixion, I wrote about that a bit this last Easter. What happened to Jesus was the mob came for him, and I'm and the authorities washed their hands of him, and they crucified him as a danger. That kind of mobbing, people have been writing about it. There's an interesting article on Quillette just this past week about someone who stopped being part of the mob and saying, what was I doing? Taking such pleasure and calling people racist and sexist all the time, and sending people after each other in this way. That Milo, I was thinking about sort of the things he's gotten shamed for. When I say he's holding a mirror up to people, what he got shamed for on Twitter was basically what Twitter's like, right? It's like, he's not there anymore, but it's exactly the same in terms, these sort of mob attacks on people of he never said anything racist about Leslie Jones at all. He said he made a joke about himself being in love with black men. He says she looks like a man, which is not a racist comment. It is a comment about her looks, but as he says, she's a very successful, comedian. Who plays off her own look. So, he shows you what you're like in the things that he says, and takes it, as it were, right? The worst, of course, that when he was in fact brought down by the Reagan Battalion, putting out that video about what he'd said on those live streams about his own experience as a teenager. Basically, we all learned that in fact he had been sexually abused growing up. That's the worst mirror I think you could possibly show our culture, saying, what are you thinking? Valorizing these kinds of sexual activities. And of course he's now trying to write about them in his newest book. God help him. You say he's a holy fool or he's a trickster, he is willing to make himself ridiculous, he's willing to make himself shunned, he's willing to make himself the outcast in order to show us the truth about the cultural moment. Now, why he has the courage to do that, the best I can say is he wears a cross all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something people often don't really believe that he's sincere in. They feel like it's just it's part of an act or something. But I think that's a really important point. And I think it's also really important that you've written about Milo in this way, because it's something that's lacking from general discourse and also in academia, I think, but really examining our own contemporary figures and situations through a historical or a religious tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that not and when it is done, it seems like it's kind of shoved off or poo-pooed, like it's old-fashioned or something. But I think it's actually a really essential kind of study to be able to see those patterns and those traditions and lineages at work.
Well, what's been uncanny for me, and I've also gotten pushback and a certain degree of ridicule for putting myself in this position, but I felt a lot like Mary that week when he was being shamed, and I put up a post that morning that morning when the Reagan Battalion video was posted. That was a quotation from my first book, where Mary is begging to suffer with her son. What's interesting about that is, of course, it's a commentary on the Song of Songs, which is a love poem in the Old Testament. But in the 12th century in particular, it's used as a way of imagining Christ and Mary's conversation with each other as mother and son, bride and bridegroom, lover and beloved. And that kind of layering of imagery, I realized one of the things that I hope in my new book, in my Mary and the Art of Prayer, but also in that first book, From Judgment to Passion, to help show people is, in fact, this is part of the tradition that we've utterly lost, right? Jordan Peterson is talking a lot about the Jungian archetypes and things like that, but what's really lost in Christianity is this understanding of the way in which we participate in the story, and the at this metaphorical level and at this experiential level, in the sense that when I was watching him be shamed in that way, it's like this is a pretty good analog, at least in my own perception, of that kind of meditation on what is it like to suffer with Christ when he's undergoing the shame of the crucifixion. What is it like? For me, I mean, the wonderful thing, I've sort of not really written about this quite so directly, but the wonderful thing about it for me was then I had all these people writing to me with prayers, with reflections on thanks. I've gotten hundreds of letters of thanks for the writing that I've done, many testimonies about what people in academia, people outside of academia have gone through, and the frustration that they felt about why can't we talk about all of these things anymore, and that feeling of suddenly being in the midst of a church was very interesting to me. I say now I have a responsibility to guide, to teach, to model what it is that I've learned from my studies, and I've clearly somehow I've been practicing that in the blog previously, but the blog, as you've noticed, is I feel like it has a different kind of role now that people are reading it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's two things there, I guess, that we could go off on. I guess the first should be, like you were saying, watching what happened to Milo after that story came out about his experiences as an adolescent, being sexually abused, standing by him and doing that writing afterwards, and then but also seeing kind of yourself being one of the only people there.
I've since learned there were some others, but yeah, for the most part everybody dumped him. It was awful. Not as fans, right? They absolutely stuck by him, but the swiftness with which people suddenly didn't remember who he was in the sort of commentary community, right? Was very dispiriting. Which it fit the pattern of the story. the women stuck by him. A lot of the people that write to me are, and Milo's mentioned us in his show a few times, the moms, all of the moms that he has, praying for him. And that, that socially was very, very interesting to watch. And of course it got even worse in the autumn when Joe Bernstein published his article in BuzzFeed about the emails that he had been given, and which then therefore outed me as one of Milo's correspondents. Yes, it's been a very interesting study, and well, actually, what the world means, right? And the world, usually say the world, you think about the material world or something like that, but I recognize the world in most of Christian teaching is really the social world, right? Being willing to give your life for the world. Well, the temptation is to, like the devil takes Jesus up in the desert when he's been fasting, and he, offer, I'll give you the world, the kingdoms of the world, if you bow down to me, if you give your soul to Satan. What I understand that now to mean is, the world is the social set. The President Trump calls it the swamp. Academia calls it whatever. Ourselves, right? The peers.
Yeah. The social ladder.
The social ladder, your status,
yeah,
your career is utterly dependent on other people's responding to you. But it's very, very interesting. The more you give up what you stand for and what your truth for the sake of staying in that social set, the more you sell yourself. And I've been writing a little bit about that recently, in the way in which I've seen some of the other people in whatever conservative group. I don't even know how to describe the many different networks there are out there now, right?
Right.
There's this constant effort to make sure you're not part of the group that doesn't is beyond the pale, and that Milo being the one that is always the example of don't be Milo has been very, very interesting.
Right, and I mean, not only, but I mean, you must have had a very similar position to Milo, especially after he's been kind of dismissed by the people who used to be his kind of allies in a lot of ways, because, you've kind of been paid the same price for your loyalty, I would say, in some ways. And I mean, I can't imagine. Honestly, I admire your resilience tremendously, because I imagine that this kind of criticism, I just, your most recent blog post just this week, about being, mislabeled a fascist by your peers. Like,
oh yeah.
I don't know. I guess the happy warrior ethos must work, because you seem to be hanging in there.
Well, I'd say it's because I'm not doing it. It's not me who is carrying this. And Milo is able to. I don't think he would have survived this if not for the fact that he does not wear that cross as a piece of jewelry. Yeah. And I think that certainly people have been trying to persuade me that I would be better off if I would just stop blogging, or if I would just do your scholarship, just step away. And I'm like,
just be quiet, basically.
Just be quiet. Well, yeah, really, just be quiet. You would stop if you would stop being such a Trump. What is it? Well-behaved women rarely make history. Well, I'm going for history here. That if I stop writing about him under these circumstances, what is my soul worth?
Yeah.
And that is, that's the I should get one of my own prayer cards out and I can read it on the back. This was this is the passage from Augustine that I said was inspiring me to start the blog, and I say this is what I have to live by, otherwise what is my soul worth? This is my prayer, as in effect, on the blog. You grasp my soul and topple my enemies with it. And what is our soul? A splendid weapon it may be, long, sharp, oiled, and coruscating with the light of wisdom as it is brandished. But what is this soul of ours worth? What is it capable of, unless God holds it and fights with it? Any sword, however beautifully made, lies idle if there is no warrior to take it up. So God does whatever he wishes with our soul. Since it is in his hand, it is his to use as he will. I try to write what seems right. And I'd say the sort of blog posts come to me, I'll be sort of struggling with an idea of what is it, and then the title will come to me and I'll say, aha, that's the argument. You could say that's, and I said, writing the blog helped me get out of my writer's block, but there's also, sort of this humility before your own insight.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't think it really comes from me. It doesn't have that sense. It comes from my willingness to surrender to what I'm being shown. And the posts when I try to force arguments or something, those just don't get written, right? There's or indeed, and I'll say, Milo, this is a funny thing for people to hear, right? Because they think of Milo as the one who caused the wars on Twitter and stuff like that. He's been very stern with me at times about making sure I don't fall into bitterness in some of the writing that I've done, because there's certainly things that I have felt very bitter about. And maybe I've stepped over that a little bit. And some of the things that I've written about, it's some of the things I've written. I hope not too much, but you have to train yourself to know when is this where am I going here? Yeah. Does this feel happy? Does this feel right? Is this the right level of joke? Am I, some of it though is still being honest, right? It's saying, look, you said this about me on Twitter, and I will show people, here it is, and mirror up, right? Rather than and I've tried very hard not to make jokes that aren't something I would in fact say to someone personally.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, people, if anyone who isn't familiar with your blog checks it out, it's not as spicy maybe as a Milo lecture, but, and I mean, that must be very, even
occasionally
myself.
Occasionally it is, and that gets me in the newspaper.
Yeah. But
when I call the conservatives who abandoned him in February 2017, got me in American Conservative. Rod Dreher picked that one up.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yes, and it's not ladylike to use those words. And the one that when I was pushing back against this claim that our field is full of white supremacists, and if you aren't, if you don't declare yourself not a white supremacist, your students will assume you are. That got me in the newspaper too. So occasionally I have.
Right. But I think it's, I'm sure anyone who's spent any time on the internet will understand that it's very difficult to resist sometimes the temptation to be bitter and snarky. But I think you do it very well. And I think going back to part of what's made Jordan Peterson's book so popular too, is that you really do embody that kind of that rule, right, of tell the truth or at least don't lie, right? I think that's
I've tried to, and Jordan was so inspiring in that interview when he was talking about Milo as trickster, right? Because that was also the one in which he was saying, tell the truth, and I think this is just of all the things that Jordan has said in his hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos, the most inspiring one is, if you've got tenure, you're like one of the most protected people on the planet.
Yeah.
And not only do I have tenure at the University of Chicago, the place that says we stand for academic freedom. And there's that little video that Rob Montz did about us on We the Internet TV that was released about a month ago. So, Chicago, this is where we practice, they said he called it a provocation abattoir or something like that. And he's like, you're going to come and practice the arguments here. Well, if I don't speak up in this situation, as I said back in one of the early posts that I did 2016, blogging with tenure, if I don't stand up for the things that I think are my truth and the value of our culture and the reasons that I teach what I do about the history of Christianity and the history of European civilization, if I can't stand up for it where I am with the position that I have, I'm dirt. And I say, yes, I am very privileged. I am so privileged that if I don't take the stuff that's been thrown at me for the last 2.5 years, I don't deserve it. And that's why I'd say, it's the opposite of saying, oh, well, how could you take it? And it's like, who would I be if I didn't?
Yeah.
That's the role that I've been given.
Yeah. That's really, that's so refreshing to hear, honestly. It's so great, because I feel like so many people are so intimidated by the mob, right? And by the tension between ideas that exists, like, not just in academia, but I mean, everywhere right now, practically, right? So
yes, because the mob is terrifying, and the post that I did about the crucifixion this past Easter, I was actually asked to do a little reflection at one of the churches downtown on Haydn's 7 Last Words of Christ. There was a early music ensemble quartet playing the piece, and 7 of us were asked to give reflections, and I was given not the Mary one. I was not given. No, I was surprised. It's like, woman, behold your son. It's like, wait, no, I don't get that one. I got Today you will be with me in paradise, which was what Jesus says to the good thief, and then I had to be reflect on what it meant to be crucified next to a thief, and came to this meditation on what it is to be a member of the mob, which is of course what in Good Friday, when we read the gospel story, the congregation takes the role of the mob. You're meant to be reminded that you are the ones who crucified Christ. It's not the Romans, it's not the Jews, it's you. Yeah. In the way in which human beings can be so nasty to each other, and and so
vicious.
The proof of that is in the crucifixion, when the mob calls for the crucifixion of the most innocent person ever, the Son of God, and that sense of knowing that you could be the mob, and then being willing to stand up to it and not turn into it yourself. It's heaven help me that I can continue to play it. I'm trying to, what Milo likes to say is, his motto is risus et bellum, right? Laughter in war. You need to stay joyful in all of this, because in fact we're fighting for truth, and it ultimately in a comedy that we're saved, but to lose that, to fall into the temptation to be as vindictive and mean as the mob is being in its mindlessness is very, very hard, very, very important, which I'd say, it's a gift. Milo's given me the gift of, in fact, the answer to the prayer that I had in working on all my study of medieval prayer was, what is it like, in fact, to imagine yourself into this story? Well, guess what?
There you have it.
Here we are. We're in it. The opportunity is there.
Yeah.
Imagine yourself into the story.
Yeah. So moving a bit more into talking about your field as a medievalist and as a historian, I'd really be interested in your analysis, I guess, on how medievalists, of all people in the humanities, became so preoccupied with identity politics. I mean, I guess, for anyone who's been kind of following these issues, it's been very present in the humanities as a kind of umbrella for quite some time. But it seems to me, and I may be mistaken, please correct me, but it seems like in the medievalist realm, it's only been in the last 3 or so years that the field has really become frenzied over these issues of identity.
I think there've certainly been people in the field for some time that have had the concerns that are now being expressed with such strength. But you're right that our field itself had not been quite so affected.
Yeah, they're so
debates.
Enamored of these issues. Like it, just looking at conference papers now, and it seems like it's more and more this is the focus. not really doing any real knowledge generating research, but just this endless like introspection and analysis of, oh, how can we be more something, right?
Mm-hmm.
How could we be more not?
Well, yes, yes. So there I'm trying to figure out. So there's a story of particular people who were interested in these questions, and their activities. That's part of it. I think there's the sort of this sort of general cultural moment that's also part of it. There are a couple of groups that are very specifically involved in these issues and in raising them. One calls itself the Babel Group, and it has. I'm not terrifically sure. There's a lot of overlap in the membership in these groups. The Babel Group also shares membership with some of the people that blog on In the Medieval Middle, and much of the conversation. And In the Medieval Middle has been running for some years. I think maybe 2011, possibly. I'm not quite sure how long the Babel Group has been meeting. They've had sort of conference sessions that they've put together for some time now that they sponsor at Kalamazoo. So there's a subset of scholars in the field who are interested in pursuing these debates, and they have been quite active in the last few years. And some of the people that have been most upset with me are members of those groups.
I guess I just wonder how it is that, I mean, I guess, you know, the specific research interests of active academics is a big factor, but even more generally, like just how it is that critical theory kind of not only made its way into medieval studies, but seems to have started to overtake it. And again, that might just be more my experience. So, you know.
No, your description's correct. So the critical theory stuff comes from English, and one of the things that's confusing for people thinking about medieval studies, of course, medieval studies is not really a thing. There are a few institutions like University of Toronto and the University of Notre Dame that have very important medieval studies PhD programs. But for the most part, those of us in what we call medieval studies are in particular disciplinary departments. So history or English or art history or music or philosophy. The philosophers don't tend to come to our meetings. They go to other meetings but the rest of us, they do. I've actually asked them about, it's like, where are all the Duns Scotus scholars at the Medieval Academy? Anyway, the subfields in medieval studies, we overlap in interests, and certainly in my own work, for example, I draw on work of people in liturgy, in art history, in religious studies, properly speaking, divinity school, in history, in literature studies, that certainly studying the history of Christianity, studying devotion to Mary requires me to draw on a lot of different people's work. But I'm still mainly a historian, or I'm mainly working in a mode that I consider appropriate to what a historian does, although some of my work is a little edgy methodologically and people aren't quite sure where to place it. So we can talk about that maybe some other time. That many of the people that are most active in bringing the critical theory into our discussion are obviously in English departments, and since the English departments have been involved in that kind of theorizing for some time now, it was probably only a matter of time before the medievalists started participating in it, because they need to talk to people in their own departments, right? And that is a huge challenge for those of us in medieval studies. A lot of the debate that you're certainly aware of in medieval studies is about the degree to which we do global Middle Ages, right? How much do we talk with people who work on the similar temporal period, but not in Europe? But even before that, we had the problem of talking to people who work on, say, our region, Europe, in modernity. Or, you're in a department like I am in history, and you're talking to Americanists, you're talking to people in Chinese history, you're talking to people in African history. You're always having to make the case for your own work across either time or theory or material. And modernists don't tend to pay that much attention to the medieval. The AHA, the American Historical Association, the Medieval Academy was just worried recently about the fact that AP history tests are only going to start with 1450, and we're just like, what just happened, right? You know,
you cut us out. What?
You cut us out again, right? And so, you know, it's in my own experience, having been in medieval history, medieval studies for 30 years, we've always been the outsiders, right? We to a certain extent have always been having to make the argument for the value of what we work on to people who are not necessarily that interested and see us a little bit odd. And some of what I think happened in the theater stuff is people got tired of feeling pushed out, right? They got tired of feeling pushed out of their own disciplinary discussions. And you know, theory can be very seductive because it feels like you then have connection, right? And you're able to talk to people who also work on Jane Austen or who knows what else. And so I'd say some of that happened. It bounced back into medieval studies because it then carried with it some of the concerns that those more modernist disciplines have raised, including things like race, which does not really have the same kind of place in the study of the pre-modern world, certainly in the pre-19th century world, as it did after those racial theories were developed in the 19th century.
Exactly.
So how to think about it is quite challenging. You know, whether we care about it, I've seen an essay that's out at the moment by a scholar in Anglo-Saxon studies who works on Beowulf and describes herself as a person of color, and she was mentioning the story in Bede of Abbot Hadrian, who comes from North Africa in the 7th century, along with Theodore of Tarsus, who comes from Asia Minor, and they show up and, you know, they end up in the back of Beyond and, you know, Canterbury in the 7th century, partly because of the way the Christians are being pushed out of the Mediterranean at that period. And this colleague was worried that no one talks about Abbot Hadrian. He's probably from, you know, possibly of color, definitely from North Africa. And I would say, well, actually, I've known about Abbot Hadrian. Nobody reads Abbot Hadrian. Everybody hears about the study of the liturgy, knows Abbot Hadrian, and the fact that he and Theodore bring Greek to Anglo-Saxon, monasticism, along with the liturgy in Greek and so forth. I mean, I had just been talking about it in my class on medieval England. But no, we don't mark the fact that he's from Africa in quite the same way, because the most important thing about that story is that he knows Greek, at least to Bede, right? So to some extent, this is an argument about how we care, how we assert about the stories that we're telling. And I say the most important thing is that he knows Greek and liturgy, and that Bede valued him and Theodore's instruction, and makes a big point of the enormous effect they had on Anglo-Saxon monasticism, and every scholar of Anglo-Saxon monasticism knows that story.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that I've been rather suspicious of, almost, because it seems like the emphasis or the turn towards more critical theory, it's like that's all people read at some point is the theory and not the actual texts, and that's a point that you've brought up multiple times in your discussions or rebuttals to, you know, people making these claims about the whiteness or the race issues in medieval history. And it brings me back to the idea that it seems like the knowledge generating research in medieval studies is being kind of, if not abandoned, you know, it's fallen out of popularity almost, and it seems
well. It's still going on, and I think for the most part, people are carrying on with that kind of work. This is a lively and vocal subgroup of colleagues who are, for example, writing articles for Forbes, or, you know, talking to the Chronicle of Higher Education about the debate that they're having with the conference committee now about the sessions that were chosen for next year. And what I deeply object to is the claim that the colleague who I was writing about this weekend, and some of those posts Eileen Joy has made, and this is quoted in the Chronicle article that just came out this past week, the Chronicle of Higher Education, that she says the field of medieval studies has long been a haven for people who are invested in the idea of a very white, very and very Christian, end quote, understanding of the period. that is, I think, an unfair characterization of why this history of the Middle Ages was focused on Europe. The history of the Middle Ages was focused on Europe because it was a European periodization. Mm-hmm. And I did a post about this called, it was satirical, Make the Middle Ages Dark Again. With the joke of, well, maybe we've just made it too appealing and everybody wants to study it. Maybe we should go back to the way Mark Twain used to think about the Middle Ages, which was like it was dark and benighted and, had no technology, and the Roman Catholic Church had enslaved everybody.
Yeah. Dark and nasty.
The reason it's called the Middle Ages is because that was like calling it the deplorable age. Right? It was in fact the Dark Ages. It was the period between, the fall of classical antiquity and the rise of humanism, or the rise of, the Enlightenment or the scientific. Take your pick, right? It was the Dark Ages of Catholic superstition. That's why it was, quote, a haven of study of Christianity, because it in fact was a place where you were studying the history of the Christian church, often to the opprobrium of your modernist colleagues who thought you were basically studying nonsense. And, this description of the period has been reiterated yet again in, for example, Steven Pinker's new book on the Enlightenment, where he, makes it very clear that the Enlightenment was a response to centuries of superstition. He's like channeling Gibbon, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, just like
fall of the Roman Empire is the fault of Christianity, and we don't recover from this benighted, superstitious age until sometime in wherever you want to draw the line of modernity.
Yeah, and that's something else that I find so ironic about it, right? Is it seems like so much of medieval studies has been combating this, kind of backwater idea of studying the Middle Ages. And now it's like with this identity politics, they've just thrown it right back into that category that it's, always had to defend itself against,
Yes, I had thought of it that way. Yes, it's like
it's totally ironic
again by saying that all of us who are studying it, if we're not doing it through critical race theory, which is basically the claim, are white Eurocentric, Christian bigots. And it's like, where did that come from? Right? I was trying to defend Christianity against modernity and secularism and, the dismissal of this devotional tradition by feminists, by the Reformation, and suddenly I'm being told that I'm racist for doing so. And I was like, wait a minute, and that was in the post that got me famous in the medieval studies conversation, the How to Signal You're Not a White Supremacist. That's the title of the post. Yeah. I tried to say, well, look, I work on the Virgin Mary. I work on the devotion to a woman who was described in the liturgy, and I did a little response to this. I think someone did a thing saying, one text in the liturgy doesn't prove it. I'm like, no, it's the text that's used in all of the liturgies. It's one of the verses from the Song of Songs that says, I am black but beautiful. And I know meditations, I've worked on them, I've written about them, that, go into detail on how Mary had dark hair and dark eyes, and they take very seriously this idea that she was dark. Now, it is true that Birgitta of Sweden has visions of her with blonde hair, and so many late medieval painters depict her with blonde hair, and there is a relic hair ages in Rouen that's apparently golden. So there's different opinions on what color her hair was, but the scriptural text that describes her physically is used, for example, by Pseudo Albert in his invocation of Galenic humoral theory to say she must have been the most beautiful woman there was, and she therefore must have had dark hair and dark eyes. And there's this phenomenon of in the statuary and some of the windows of Mary, although the Chartres window is probably repainted, so whether it was dark originally, I'm not sure. I was actually using that Chartres window in the post to talk about her temple imagery, which is also something that in my book I've tried to show more in depth, right? But that she's described as dark, she's often depicted as dark. Clearly they're not worrying about her race in the same way in which modern people worry about race. Now, that may mean that there's lots of different things that you could say about who they think she is, but it doesn't map directly onto the kinds of concerns that critical race theory is raising about modern American law, right? It's a legal problem originally in the theory. sorry, I had another thought about where I was going with the Marian argument. Oh, yes, that and the temple imagery, of course, which I've tried to show in my new book, goes back to, through the Psalms, through the way in which wisdom literature about Mary, to the ancient Hebrew tradition, which I've argued in the book is therefore potentially in greater continuity than we've seen, which in fact means my devotion, my entire life has been given to study the devotion to a woman from the Near East. Right. Jerusalem was the center of the world. They knew that Jerusalem was the center of the world, and the European Christians looked to that place as a place on earth, and they do not seem to have cared in the way that my colleagues claim I care, which I don't, about whiteness. And so I pushed back quite forcefully in that post because I was so frustrated with this misrepresentation of have the scholarly field in the first place. Now, if you want, in fact, to study what was going on across Eurasia, across the world, in the same period, which in Europe is called the Middle Ages, in comparative history, please do. I've taught courses on that. Yeah. I've used material from different regions of the world. I've done a comparative course on knights and samurai specifically to do this kind of global comparative work. Yes, absolutely, no problem. But that's not because anyone that I'm aware of in my scholarly career has studied the Middle Ages because we're white supremacists.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so, but so given the situation that we're kind of in, like where do you see medieval studies going down the road, say, 5, 10, 20 years from now? And the university more generally. I think Canadian universities are in a similar situation in a lot of ways as American universities. And my outlook, I try not to be too cynical, but it's not always optimistic. So,
well, in my first book, I talk about the fears that arose around the year 1000 and the sort of apocalyptic predictions that they made. Making apocalyptic predictions is guaranteed.
Guaranteed to fail. It's
hope. It's a grand tradition of making those, and it's sort of entertaining to me that we're at the beginning of them, so do with that what you will.
Right.
I think we've been defending the humanities wrong, and it's interesting that one of the things that was said against me last year and a half ago when I wrote my piece about Milo in the University of Chicago Divinity School newsletter, saying what his campus tour demonstrated in the reactions that it provoked, particularly at Berkeley, was a lack of practice in talking through deep theological questions. I thought, making that argument, I would endear myself to my colleagues in the Divinity School. The reverse happened. 29 of them signed a statement declaring that I did not represent their diversity. What I thought I was arguing for was the significance of studying deep theological questions and practicing arguing them, as indeed the medieval universities in Europe were set up to do disputations and so forth. That we have not. One of the pushbacks saying I said something about students are given this religion of multiculturalism and race, class, gender studies and so forth. And one of my colleagues not at the university, but from one of the other institutions in the United States said, well, but in fact, the right has won the universities. They're all corporatized and all we do is business studies. And I'm like, well, that's actually true too, right? One of the largest undergraduate degree that we have at the University of Chicago is economics. And, maybe the second is medicine and the third is mathematics. I don't, roughly speaking, right? Yes, STEM and business are the preferred degrees, even at the University of Chicago, and certainly across the country, humanities is suffering. We are not appealing to people to major in our fields, and we are not making terrifically good arguments about how, what the value of studying the arts and music and literature of our tradition. or tradition. In fact, I mean, the humanities are declining all across the board, not just in English. So one of the arguments that's typically made is, well, we teach skills, and I say, I might get a little bit spicy if I said that. Hogwash. No, teaching skills is not, we don't do that very well. If you actually want to teach skills, we should be teaching the trivium. We should go back to the medieval instruction in grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Thank you very much. And teach skills as skills. Dorothy Sayers has a wonderful essay called The Lost Tools of Learning, in which she makes this argument. And I, in fact, have taught a course on the trivium, modeling what it might look like to, follow a medieval curriculum in the language arts. Oh, yes. It's all my, awesome. So for your listeners, all of my syllabi for courses are on my homepage, home.uchicago.edu/R Fulton. But Google me and you'll find, and all my syllabi are there and my trivium course is there. So if we want to teach skills, we should teach skills. What we need to care about is teaching the content. And weirdly enough, the humanities has not made its own argument for its own content in some time, right? We should care about beauty. We should care about...
Absolutely. And I found it seems, like you said, I think that's a really good point, this kind of strange emphasis on teaching skills that isn't really there, and at the same time saying, well, we don't really need the canon anymore. It's, right. I think they have it backwards.
They have it utterly backward. Yeah. And of course, the critical theory is just one manifestation of this, right? When I was in graduate school back in the late 80s, early 90s, then postmodern deconstructionism, whatever was going on then. And of course, as a medievalist, I was a bit bemused by that because I'm reading all of this biblical commentary and it, has multiple levels of meaning. And guess what? Roland Barthes didn't discover it himself. He learned it from reading Henri de Lubac's medieval exegesis, The Four Senses of Scripture. Barthes adds a fifth and calls it polysemy. But in fact, it was inspired by his sort of reincorporation of the medieval practice of reading multiple layers of meaning in text. Yeah. So I was doing that all along. And applying reading practices, yes, you need to train people to read well and thoughtfully and look for patterns. And I, at one point, back when I was interviewing for jobs, I was asked to describe my method, and I said, well, I think I'm accidentally a structuralist, right? Because I was looking for the structures in these biblical commentaries, the way in which they're making narrative and so forth. So none of that is bad as such, right? But the problem is you have to do it with an appreciation for the thing you're describing. And what I start my book, Mary and the Art of Prayer, with a little meditation that I take from Elaine Scarry's Body and Pain on the importance of the object in the imagination, right? That devotion, like the imagination, requires an object. It takes its shape and meaning from the object on which you're concentrating. So and Scarry has this wonderful meditation about how if you tell people to imagine something like, and they imagine a unicorn, you think of the imagination as something that's about make-believe, right? But if you say, you're hungry and you imagine food, you realize it's very, very practical, right? So what you think of the capacity to imagine by the thing that you imagine with it. And I use that to say, devotion is similar, that what you carry in your imagination as you pray, as you focus your attention, gives shape to your life. And that for 2,000 years, Christians have defined themselves by their focus on God and his mother imagined in particular ways. And that is the method that I'm saying I need to help people understand, that you are shaped by the things that you hold in your attention. You are shaped by the things that you hold in your imagination. So you better want to be holding those things in your imagination. And if you meditate on beauty and joy and love and creativity, those things will come to you in your life. If you meditate on hate and ugliness and calling other people racist, that's what you've shaped your soul to become.
Absolutely. That's a really, I like that a lot. That's a good way to put it. And I think, again, that would have a totally rejuvenating effect, not just on, historical fields, but English especially. And I I feel like English desperately needs some love. Yeah, and to just read their books again and find the beauty and the passion in them and the meaning and just the the strength that literature can convey the human experience with. It seems like appreciation for that has become like unpopular, and it's sad to me.
I teach the course on Tolkien, and Tolkien has that amazing meditation topically, because this is in his essay on Beowulf, about how he gave the lecture in 1936. Is that right? About how even back then, the scholars of Beowulf had themselves with basically tearing the poem apart. At that point, they were tearing it apart to look for historical truths in it. It's like it was this artifact of pagan Anglo-Saxonism, and so they were
trying to map it onto history in some way.
Right. And the metaphor that he used was of the tower, that they'd torn down this tower and it was on the top of this hill, and it's like, and they're looking at all the stones that they've scattered all over the field, and like, well, that's not very much, it's just rubble. And he's like, but from the tower you could see the sea, right? And what he was trying to do was get people to start reading Beowulf again as a work of art and as something with a particular structure that was showing you something through its actual poetic form, and the monsters in the poem as well. And that much of this frustration that is being expressed in medieval studies right now is from people who work in Anglo-Saxon and work on Beowulf. And I teach Beowulf every other year as one of the texts that we use in History of European Civilization. So I've actually reread it a number of times. I understand the sort of, it's a wonderful poem. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem, and very challenging to read. I tend to read it as a story about virtue and vice, and that the monsters are showing us human vices of greed and envy. The dragon is greed, and Grendel's mother is vengeance because her son's killed, and Grendel himself is envy at the work of creation, right? The reason that he hates the Danes so much is they have this mead hall in which they sing, the bards sing the song of creation.
So, and that's, I guess that's, we've been going for a while here. I don't want to keep you too long, but I did want to talk to you a bit about your work on Tolkien before I let you go.
Okay.
And it's just another reason, I guess, I follow your work, because I'm a big Tolkien fan. And Tolkien, despite the fact that he is, an amazingly accomplished medievalist and linguist, he often doesn't get a lot of attention from either English or medieval scholars. But you,
I have to give a shout out to Jane Chance, who has been one of my great champions over the last year. Jane does magnificent work on Tolkien. So yes, there is
there's a few out there.
and there's more. I mean, there's a good subset of people that do very interesting work on Tolkien, and they regularly, because of Jane, have sessions at Kalamazoo. So it's its own subfield in certain respects. Yeah. But what I do in Tolkien is somewhat different from most of the things that I've heard them talk about. I don't always go to the sessions. I've presented them a few times, but for the most part, they're concerned with different kinds of questions than I am. I mainly teach my course as, it's not so stealthy anymore. When I started, it was sort of stealth theology. Now it's just, I have to admit it at the beginning and say, what I want you to see is the way in which Tolkien was actually doing theology through his fairy stories, and why he would use fairy story as a way of thinking through questions of theology. And the primary one is, of course, this idea of creation and subcreation, that as Tolkien understood it, we are creatures made in the image and likeness of a maker, and so we make still in the image and likeness in which we were made, and that's misquoting, in this poem that he wrote for C.S. Lewis, inspiring him one of the things that helped inspire Lewis to convert to Christianity, saying that we are artists, and we're artists because we're made in the image and likeness of an artist. But being made in the image and likeness of an artist, we encounter various problems, and much of what Tolkien does in his stories is show. Verlyn Flieger has this wonderful book called Splintered Light, where she talks about the way this plays out in the Silmarillion. Tolkien himself talked about. This is her phrase. Sorry, this is not his. That what Flieger says Tolkien does is make literal what in the primary world would be metaphorical, and what Tolkien said is that what he wanted to do was make visible and physical the effects of sin with misused free will by men. So that his stories are all about this problem, misuse of our free will, and the way that he shows that is through people's response to other people's free will and to their own creativity. And in the Silmarillion, it's the story of Fëanor. In the Silmarils, in the Lord of the Rings, obviously, it's Sauron with the ring, and also Gollum's use of the ring. And it's this problem of what it is not be. Possessiveness and greed, right? And the Grendel, Grendel and the dragon obviously are in the back of Tolkien's mind all the time. Gollum is very Grendel-like, and the dragon obviously features in The Hobbit. But it's this problem of for example, in the Silmarillion, Fëanor makes the Silmarils and basically pours his life into them. They're like living jewels. Yeah. But when Morgoth and Ungoliant kill the trees that were the source of the light that are in the gemstones, the Valar ask Fëanor to break the stones, and maybe they can use the light that's in the stones to revive the tree, and he says no, right? And that, the great tragedy is at this point Morgoth has already stolen the Silmarils, and so he didn't really have an option. But the choice that Fëanor had to make about whether or not to sacrifice his own creation is his moment of fall. And of course, after that, everything goes bad because he couldn't let go of the thing that he had made in order to help, in fact, this other, the trees that were somebody else's creation. And that I try to talk it through in my class, that problem of free will and choices, and show the students that what Tolkien is doing in his stories is making visible and physical these effects of sin through the adventures that the characters go through.
Right. And again, so it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with just really reading these texts and seeing them in the context that the authors created them, right? And then once you do that, all of these accusations, and as they apply to Tolkien as well, of being racist or exclusionary or white supremacist or Eurocentric, just kind of disappear when you have the reading and the historical context like firmly in hand. So I think that's really important thing to do with Tolkien as well.
So I certainly think so. So we read his letters, and I expect the students to have read The Lord of the Rings before the course begins, so that we have time, so that they're rereading, right? And a good deal. The practice is also the rereading, right? Just like I said back with my Milo stories, right? That finding yourself in the same story, right? That Sam and Frodo talk about that on the stories of Cirith Ungol, right? And Sam recognizes that there's that Silmaril, which is the star in the night sky, that they have also in the star glass that Galadriel has given them. It's captured some of that starlight, and it's Arendelle with the star on his brow, who's traveling the skies as the morning star, who carries therefore the light of the trees. Tolkien loves this kind of, you find that you're in fact in the same story through these lineages of both people, the characters, right? The family trees are very, very important, and the objects and the trees, right? There's trees and jewels and people that are all bound together in this long story. And of course, for Tolkien, he thinks of this all as a fairy story, and he says on fairy stories that the truest, the most amazing fairy story is the Gospels. It's history and art have met and fused in the story of the Incarnation and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and that finding ourselves in that story is what he's trying to make visible and physical, I suppose. You understand what it is to find yourself in that story. And that, to go back to my Augustinian theme from my blog, is indeed the way Augustine talks in his work on how to instruct catechumens. You're basically showing them the way in which they find themselves in the history of the church, right? So that you are showing yourself to be part of this long, well, it's a comedy ultimately, right? Because we're saved, but it's this long story that you indeed belong in, even from the mythological beginnings to the present in your own history.
Yeah, and putting it exactly, keeping it in that that sense of belonging and your place in tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, and properly speaking, that is what I understand being conservative, right? Not that you don't go on your own adventure and in fact find yourself in great danger and have to make real choices and so forth, but you understand yourself as a part of that long story and making new parts of it. I was thinking, it's like one of my friends is trying to help me think about how we market me. It's like, what's your unique principle, right, for, I don't know, getting myself on more wonderful podcasts? And I say, well, I could be the playful medievalist, right? I'll tell you about my tattoos sometime and how much I enjoy Ink Master, which should be the last thing you would expect me to like as, quote, a conservative, right? Ink Master is brilliant, great reality TV.
Okay.
And I did a blog post about that. You can say why I love Ink Master, or Ink Master Chivalry. There are two of them. And it's because it's about art and creativity and challenge and competition, and it's beautifully grassroots, right? I love the way they bring, people from all sorts of backgrounds onto the show. Obviously, the producers are casting it well, but it's, it's saying the tattoo world is filled with people who've been in prison, with women who are, wanting to be accepted for their art and for their talent and for their skill, with guys who are trying to, support their families, with, people who've gone through really, really traumatic changes in their lives and are putting themselves into their art. And the way those artists talk about their work as tattooists, right? You see someone with tattoo on my tattoos are invisible. You can't see them unless I'm wearing a bikini, I guess. But that you see someone, they're living art, right? It's a very interesting cultural moment, and it's very easy to be snobbish about it. It's very easy to be hip about it. What I see is it's the realization of the invitation to make in the image and likeness that we're called to.
That's the best pitch for a reality TV show I think I've ever heard.
Dave Navarro and Chris and Oliver should be in touch, don't you think?
Absolutely. I have to admit, I haven't had a proper TV in probably like 6 or 7 years now. So I'm
you can buy it on Amazon Prime. You can watch it on your iPad.
Okay. Yeah, well, and it actually kind of inspires me to get my terrible tattoo looked after, which maybe is a story for another day as well. But,
one of the very first, and this was the chivalry moments, right? There are a number of very chivalric moments in the series, and one of the best was the very first episode, the very first season they did it. The man who came in second, Tommy Helms, was so polite. It was just like awed everybody, right? It's like down to the wire, right? And he came in second. Usually when you come in second, you feel the worst in the world, right? Because you were almost there. And he was utterly gracious, and he said, "Thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really learned a lot. In tattoos work." He got his own show, which is the good guys win. And but their show is called Tattoo Nightmares. And,
oh no!
And they do cover-ups of bad ones. And so, and that one, I mean, the drama on that is quite lovely too, because they get people to come in and say, "Well, I got this bad tattoo," and it's like, "How on earth did you get that bad tattoo?" And of course, it's the real life drama of people making bad choices, but they're all redemptive too, right? It's like, and I want to put that behind me and take care of my kids. I want to put that behind me and really, work on my marriage. I want to put that behind me and
turn a new page, like a new
page.
Yeah.
So not just, it's not you just don't get rid of the bad tattoo. You get rid of the whole bad history that goes with that tattoo and go out with beauty.
I try to use my bad tattoo as a teaching moment.
Well, okay, you can do that too.
Yeah. I this long as kind of I guess a reminder and a teaching moment for myself and others. But well, that's great. Well, that's a nice note to leave it on, I think. And for anyone who wants to follow Rachel's work, like she said, you can find her just a quick Google search, and you'll find her homepage at the University of Chicago site. Fencing Bear at Prayer is the blog page, and you can find the entire back catalog there.
Yes, and on the blog page there are 3 subpages at the top tabbed to follow these different stories. So the Milo Chronicles, if you're mainly interested in Milo, Medieval Gate, if you're curious about the medieval story, and then there's a third one that's called The Lady and the Logos, and that one's really my Mary and Jordan Peterson blend, because it's I did a number of his self-authoring posts at some point. I've also written about.
I remember following that. Your writing on that.
Right. So I was doing his self-authoring Virtues and Vices, and I've written some feminine imagery, and some of the things that I've learned watching him. I don't know whether you were going to say this, but I should also say, so my friends and I do a video conversation on these kinds of big ideas. We'll have to get you on this.
Criminally undersubbed, I should say.
We're working on it. Got to figure out these selling point. 3 Creators Symposium, and you can find us on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I definitely recommend everyone. I will leave a link to that. Excuse me, when this is posted on the YouTube, and lots of great episodes there too. And are you always on the 3KS podcast, or are you more of a rotating guest?
I'm really mostly there. The times we live stream on Friday, and I miss some of them because I was, for example, at Kalamazoo.
Right.
So it's the 3 that are most consistent, Greg and Josh and Lewis. I think they've missed 1 in the year. It's been quite a journey.
That's an excellent.
And I'm very proud of
record.
them. Yes, for doing so well.
Awesome. Yeah, well, everyone, so 3KS podcast, Fencing Bear at Prayer blog, and Rachel Borwn, University of Chicago. It's been an absolute pleasure, very much, for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and I'd love to have you back. There's a lot that we didn't get to cover, like Jordan Peterson, like the feminine and culture. I would love to hear your thoughts on ideas from scholars like Camille Paglia, who have these kind of very grand visions of culture and history and patriarchy and all of it. So I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but it's been a pleasure. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with us at the kitchen table today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you yourself would like to come to the kitchen table one of these days, or if you have a guest in mind for the kitchen table, please let me know in the comments below. As well, as usual, if there's something you'd like to contribute to Freethink Radio, or something you'd like to hear us talk more about, let us know. You can send that to freethinkradio@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone. Catch you next time.